My name is Vanessa. I am 34 years old and a forensic accountant who specializes in dismantling corporate fraud. I spend my days tracking down hidden assets and exposing liars. But the biggest fraud I ever uncovered was not sitting in a corporate boardroom. It was sitting at my patio table, eating potato salad and smiling at my daughter. For my daughter Lily's 10th birthday, my parents handed her a beautiful gift box. At first, she seemed happy lifting a delicate pink silk dress from the tissue paper. But then she froze. Her small hands gripped the fabric, and she looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "What is this, Mommy?" she whispered. I leaned in, expecting to see a stain or a tear. Instead, I saw a name embroidered across the collar in elegant gold thread. It did not say Lily. It said Brittany Junior. My hands started shaking, but my mind went instantly cold and calculating. I dug deeper into the box and found the real gift hidden beneath the tissue paper. It was a court-stamped legal petition to formally change my living child's name to match my sister's. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your peace from a toxic family that tried to control your life. Growing up in an upscale suburb outside of Chicago, my parents Richard and Susan made one thing perfectly clear. I was the ultimate disappointment. While my younger sister Brittany was the golden child perfectly groomed for high society, I was the stubborn rebel who married a middle-class public school teacher instead of a wealthy executive. When my husband passed away 3 years ago, leaving me a single mother, my parents viewed it not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to finally correct the mistake of my independence. They thought grief had made me weak. They thought I would blindly follow their commands just to keep the peace. They were entirely wrong. The backyard of my home was filled with the sounds of children laughing and the smell of barbecue. I had worked tirelessly to build a secure, beautiful life for Lily on my own terms. Jamal, my sister Brittany's husband, stood by the cooler. He is an African-American wealth manager who wears custom Tom Ford suits and carries himself like he owns every room he walks into. He was swirling a glass of expensive bourbon he brought himself, looking utterly bored by my modest suburban gathering. Brittany was sitting next to him, applying a fresh coat of lip gloss, waiting for the grand reveal of the gift. I stood there holding the pink silk dress in one hand and the legal petition in the other. The petition was completely filled out, citing that the name change was in the best interest of the child to honor her beloved aunt. It even had a line for my signature flagged with a bright yellow sticky note. I looked at Richard and Susan. They were beaming, waiting for me to break down in gratitude or perhaps dissolve into tears of submission. They expected the old Vanessa, the one who used to apologize just for breathing too loudly in their presence. Instead of screaming, I calmly folded the legal document and slipped it into the back pocket of my jeans. Then I turned around and walked over to the large gas grill, where the hot dogs and burgers were sizzling. The flames were dancing perfectly over the heated grates. Without breaking eye contact with my mother, I dropped the custom embroidered pink silk dress directly onto the open flame. The delicate fabric caught fire instantly, sending a plume of dark, foul-smelling smoke up into the clear blue sky. Lily gasped, but I placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Susan shot up from her patio chair, her face turning a violent shade of red. "Are you insane?" Susan shrieked, her voice cutting through the party music and silencing the rest of the guests. That was pure imported silk. Do you have any idea how much that dress cost? It was a beautiful family tribute. I stepped away from the grill, feeling the heat of the fire against my back. "A tribute?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "You do not rename a 10-year-old child like she is a rescue dog you just brought home from the pound. Her name is Lily. It has been Lily for a decade." Richard stood up, his jaw clenched, adjusting his expensive golf shirt. "You are overreacting, Vanessa," he said, using that deep, authoritative tone he always used to end arguments. "Brittany is her aunt. She cannot have children of her own. We thought it would be a beautiful gesture to bond the two of them together. You are a struggling widow. We are simply trying to help you integrate Lily into the real legacy of this elite family." I looked at Jamal, who was suddenly very interested in his bourbon, and then at Brittany, who was playing the victim perfectly, wiping an invisible tear from her eye. They were trying to erase my daughter's identity right in front of my face. But my forensic accountant brain was already running the variables. You do not spend thousands of dollars on custom legal petitions just for a sweet family tribute. There was a hidden motive, a massive financial motive, and I was going to tear their entire lives apart to find exactly what it was. The toxic black smoke from the melting silk drifted over my manicured lawn, carrying the bitter smell of burnt plastic and ruined expectations. My neighbors and friends stood completely frozen around the patio, their paper plates half filled with barbecue, staring at the spectacle my family had just created. The silence was thick, broken only by the hiss of the gas grill. Richard, my father, stepped forward. He hated losing control of an audience. He adjusted his posture, forcing a tight, patronizing smile. "Listen, everyone," Richard announced, projecting his voice across the yard. "Please forgive my daughter. Grief is a terrible thing. It has been 3 years since her husband passed, but the emotional toll has left Vanessa unstable. We did not want to make this public today, but given her erratic behavior, I must explain. My wife and I, along with my daughter Brittany and Jamal, have made a family decision. Since Vanessa is a struggling widow who cannot provide the proper environment for a growing child, Brittany and Jamal have generously agreed to legally adopt Lily. We are stepping in to give my granddaughter the elite life she deserves." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of my friends. Lily tightened her grip on my hand, shrinking behind my leg. I squeezed her hand back, keeping my eyes locked on the intruders. Brittany nodded solemnly, playing the tragic heroine, while Jamal stepped up beside my father, straightening the cuffs of his tailored suit. He looked around my modest, lovingly maintained backyard with open disgust. "Let us be realistic here," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Vanessa is just a spreadsheet checker. She spends her days staring at numbers in a cubicle. Lily deserves to grow up in our gated community surrounded by success and opportunity. She should not be forced to scrape by living off a dead school teacher's life insurance payout for the rest of her life." My late husband was a dedicated educator who spent his life building up the people around him. He left behind a legacy of love and respect, two concepts Jamal clearly knew nothing about. I stepped away from the grill and walked slowly toward the four of them. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My profession required me to dismantle aggressive, powerful, and arrogant men on a daily basis. I looked Jamal directly in the eye, watching his smug expression falter just a fraction under my unwavering stare. "You do not get to speak about my husband," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a scalpel. "And you certainly do not get to stand on the property he helped buy and tell me you are stealing our daughter. You are not generous. You are trespassing." I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the screen. "I am giving you exactly 60 short seconds to walk out of my backyard down the driveway and get off my property. If I can still see your expensive cars parked on my street when the timer goes off, I am calling the police. I will have you all arrested for trespassing and harassment right in front of the entire neighborhood." Susan gasped loudly, tightly clutching her pearl necklace. "You would not dare call the police on your own parents," she sputtered, her facade finally cracking. "Try me," I whispered, holding up the phone. The countdown started. 50 seconds. Richard glared at me, his face turning a deep, angry purple. He realized I was not bluffing. The quiet, obedient daughter he once knew was completely gone, replaced by a woman who would burn down the world to protect her child. "Come on, Susan," Richard snapped, grabbing his wife by the elbow. "We are leaving. She is completely out of her mind. We will let the lawyers handle this on Monday." Brittany scowled, grabbing her designer bag. Jamal gave me one last threatening glare before following Richard and Susan out the side gate. I stood perfectly still, watching them march down the driveway. I listened to the aggressive revving of their engines as they sped away. The heavy silence returned to the backyard. I turned back to my guests who were still staring in shock. I forced a warm, reassuring smile for my daughter. "Who wants cake?" I asked, acting as if I had simply taken out the trash. Beneath my calm exterior, my mind was racing. They fired the first shot, assuming I would roll over. They fundamentally misunderstood what a forensic accountant does. I do not just check spreadsheets. I find the hidden money and I use it to destroy people. The harsh ringing of my cell phone shattered the quiet of my bedroom. I glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. It was exactly 7 in the morning. I had barely slept my mind, spending the entire night categorizing every interaction from the disastrous barbecue. I reached for the phone, expecting it to be my mother attempting an apology, or perhaps my father issuing another thinly veiled threat. Instead, the caller ID displayed the main branch number of my national bank. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Banks do not call retail customers at 7 in the morning on a Monday, unless something is catastrophically wrong. I swiped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear. "This is Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice level. The voice on the other end belonged to a customer service manager named David. He sounded incredibly nervous, clearing his throat before speaking. "Ms. Vanessa, I am calling regarding the custodial savings account ending in 4821, the college fund established by your late husband. I am very sorry to inform you that as of midnight, a hard freeze has been placed on all funds in that account." I sat straight up in bed, kicking the sheets away. "That is a private trust account," I said, my forensic instincts kicking into high gear. "I am the sole trustee, and my daughter is the sole beneficiary. There are no outstanding debts or liens against my name. On what legal authority has the bank frozen my assets?" David cleared his throat again, clearly uncomfortable reading the notes on his screen. The freeze was initiated externally by a verified wealth management firm, citing a pending emergency custody transfer, David explained. The flag was processed through our priority channel. The requesting parties submitted preliminary court filings indicating that the minor child is being placed under their immediate guardianship due to an unstable home environment. Until the custody dispute is resolved in a court of law, standard regulations require us to secure the child's financial assets to prevent misappropriation by the current guardian. I did not need to ask which wealth management firm had initiated the freeze. Jamal. He was a senior director at a luxury investment firm that managed billions of dollars. He had the connections and the institutional leverage to push a fraudulent hold through the automated banking systems before a human being ever reviewed the actual paperwork. He had taken the unsigned legal petition from my barbecue, likely forged my signature, or filed it as a contested emergency motion, and used his corporate credentials to legitimize it in the eyes of my bank. This was no longer just a toxic family dispute over holiday dinners, or a tasteless joke about a name change. This was a highly coordinated, aggressive financial and legal attack designed to completely paralyze me. They were cutting off my resources. They knew I made a good salary, but they also knew that fighting a protracted legal battle for custody against a family with bottomless pockets would drain my liquid assets in weeks. By freezing Lily's college fund, they were taking away my safety net and holding my husband's hard-earned money hostage. "Are you still there, Ms. Vanessa?" David asked, his voice pulling me back. "I am here, David," I replied, stepping out of bed and walking toward my closet. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. The emergency custody transfer is a fraudulent filing. The individual who initiated this freeze is attempting to manipulate banking protocols to extort me. I understand you cannot lift the freeze over the phone without verifying the documents. I will be at your main branch in exactly 1 hour. Have the branch manager and a representative from your legal compliance department waiting for me." I ended the call without waiting for his confirmation. My hands were perfectly steady. When my husband died, the grief had been a suffocating blanket that made it hard to get out of bed. But this was not grief. This was absolute rage. My family had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Jamal thought he was dealing with an emotional, defenseless widow who would panic at the first sign of financial distress. He assumed I would call my father begging for help, ultimately surrendering my daughter just to make the nightmare stop. He was about to learn a very hard lesson. I walked straight down the hall to Lily's room. She was fast asleep, clutching her stuffed bear. I kissed her forehead silently, promising her that no one was ever going to take her away. I called my neighbor to sit with her. Then I splashed cold water on my face and put on my most intimidating corporate suit. It was finally time to go to the bank. The drive downtown was a blur of morning traffic and cold determination. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I mentally cataloged the legal statutes regarding fraudulent asset freezing. I parked my car in the structure across from the main branch, grabbed my briefcase, and walked out into the brisk air. The imposing glass facade of the bank loomed ahead. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors, expecting to head straight to the manager's office. Instead, I found Jamal leaning casually against the polished marble counter of the reception desk. He was performing for the staff. He had a styrofoam coffee cup in one hand and was using the other to animatedly chat with a young teller, flashing that expensive, practiced smile. He wore a sharp navy suit that probably cost more than my first car. When he spotted me walking across the wide lobby, his smile morphed into a look of deep, exaggerated pity. He stepped away from the counter and approached me, holding his hands up in a placating gesture as if trying to calm a hysterical woman. "Vanessa, I am so glad you came," Jamal said, his voice carrying just enough volume for the tellers and security guards to hear. "We are all so worried about you and Lily. You have been under so much pressure since your husband passed. You need to let the family help you carry this heavy burden." I stopped a few feet away from him, my expression completely blank. I did not raise my voice, nor did I play into the pathetic spectacle he was trying to create for the bank employees. "What are you doing here, Jamal?" I asked, my tone perfectly even and devoid of emotion. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, and dropped the concerned uncle act entirely. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper meant only for my ears. "I am here to make sure you understand the harsh reality of your situation," he sneered. "You are completely out of your depth, Vanessa. You thought you could just kick us out of your house, and that would be the end of it. My firm manages assets for half the executives in this building. When I tell them a grieving widow is misappropriating a minor's trust fund, they listen to me." I adjusted my grip on my briefcase. "You filed a forged emergency custody petition to freeze my daughter's college fund," I stated, laying out the facts simply. "That is wire fraud, Jamal. It is a federal offense punishable by prison time." Jamal let out a low, arrogant chuckle. "Prove it," he whispered, leaning in closer until I could smell his expensive cologne. "You are an accountant working for a paycheck. I have a team of corporate lawyers on retainer who bill more in an hour than you make in a month. If you try to fight this name change and the adoption, I will bury you in litigation. I will file motion after delay until you are drowning in legal fees. I will tie you up in family court until you are completely bankrupt and begging my wife to take Lily just so you can afford to keep the lights on. Be smart for once in your life. Sign the papers, let Brittany have the kid on paper, and this all goes away quietly." He checked his watch, a massive, gleaming custom Rolex Daytona, making sure I caught the flash of diamonds and heavy gold. He was trying to intimidate me with his wealth, asserting his dominance through luxury brands and aggressive physical posturing. He expected me to fold. He expected tears. I looked at the watch, and then I looked up at his arrogant face. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and quickly snapped a photo of his wrist. The artificial shutter click sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet, thick tension between us. Jamal frowned, pulling his arm back slightly. "What are you doing?" he demanded, a sudden flicker of genuine confusion breaking through his carefully constructed, arrogant facade. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the sharp, predatory smile of an auditor who had just found the missing decimal point in a cooked ledger. "That is a beautiful watch, Jamal," I whispered, stepping right into his space so he could hear every single syllable clearly. "A custom piece like that runs about $50,000, does it not? It really completes the image of a wildly successful wealth manager." Jamal narrowed his eyes defensively. "What is your point, Vanessa?" "My point," I continued softly, never breaking eye contact, "is that a man wearing a $50,000 watch should not have a suspiciously declined credit card when he tries to pay for his $4 latte at the drive-thru across the street this morning." Jamal's face instantly fell. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale. His confident posture crumbled, his shoulders sagging a fraction of an inch as panic flashed in his eyes. "You think you are the only one who knows people in the financial district?" I whispered. "I build corporate risk profiles for a living. I know exactly what it looks like when a man is overleveraged and desperate for cash. You do not want my daughter because you love her. You need her trust fund because you are drowning." Before he could formulate a response, the heavy mahogany door to the branch manager's office opened. David, the customer service manager I spoke to earlier, stepped out, accompanied by a woman in a sharp gray suit holding a tablet. "Ms. Vanessa," David called out nervously. "The branch manager and our legal compliance officer are ready for you now." I turned my back on Jamal, leaving him standing frozen in the middle of the bank lobby, completely speechless. I walked toward the office, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, ready to begin dismantling his entire life. The meeting inside the branch manager's office was brutally efficient. I laid out the timeline for the bank manager and the legal compliance officer, explaining exactly how Jamal used his corporate credentials to bypass standard verification protocols. I provided my identification and the authentic trust documents. The compliance officer looked horrified and immediately initiated an internal fraud alert against Jamal's firm. While they could not unfreeze the account instantly without a judge's signature, they permanently blocked Jamal from accessing a single cent and flagged his entire wealth management branch for regulatory review. I walked out of the bank with a grim sense of satisfaction. Jamal was no longer waiting in the lobby. He had fled the building. I reached the parking garage, unlocked my car, and slid into the driver's seat. Just as I put my key in the ignition, my phone buzzed loudly in my purse. The screen displayed a photo of my mother Susan looking perfectly coiffed at some high society charity gala. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable theatrics, and answered the call. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "Listen to me very carefully, Vanessa," my mother snapped. Her voice was sharp, carrying that familiar tone of absolute authority she used whenever she felt she was losing control. I expected her to ask how her granddaughter was doing, or perhaps apologize for the terrible spectacle at the barbecue. I should have known better. There was no warmth on the line, no maternal concern. There was only a cold, calculated business transaction. "Your father and I have discussed your little stunt at the bank this morning," Susan continued angrily. "Jamal called us in an absolute panic. You are making a massive mistake by fighting this process. We have decided that if you do not sign the name change and adoption papers by Friday, you are completely out. We are writing you out of the family will. You will not see a single penny of the estate, and we will make sure you are cut off from everyone in our network." I gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring blankly out the windshield at the gray concrete wall of the parking garage. "Are you seriously threatening to disinherit me over a fraudulent custody petition?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "You are trying to steal my daughter, Susan." "Oh, stop being so melodramatic," she scoffed dismissively, as if I had just complained about the weather. "We are not stealing her. We are upgrading her life. Brittany needs a child, Vanessa. You know how important Jamal's social circle is to his career. All the senior partners at his wealth management firm are devoted family men. Brittany's inability to conceive makes them look incomplete, like they do not fit the proper elite mold. They need a child to secure their status, to host the right playdates, to get invited to the right country club family events." I felt a wave of pure disgust wash over me. They did not love Lily. They did not care about her future or her happiness. To my mother, my sister, and Jamal, my beautiful 10-year-old daughter was nothing more than an accessory. She was a living prop they needed to buy their way into a higher social tax bracket. "You were always the selfish one, Vanessa," my mother hissed, her frustration finally boiling over into pure malice. "You never thought about anyone but yourself. You owe your sister this after you humiliated us by refusing to go to law school. We had your entire life planned out. You were supposed to join your father's firm, but instead you settled for a boring accounting degree and married a public school teacher who could not even afford a house in our zip code. You ruined our family image. This is your chance to finally make it right. Give Brittany the child she needs, and you can go back to your quiet, mediocre life without dragging the rest of us down." The silence on the line stretched for a long moment. My mother waited, fully expecting me to cave under the heavy weight of her disappointment. For 34 years, that toxic tactic had worked perfectly. The fear of being cut off, of being the family outcast, had always kept me in line. But the woman she was talking to was not the scared little girl she remembered. "Keep your money, Susan," I said quietly. "I do not want a single dime from your estate. And if you or Brittany come near my daughter again, I will make sure the only social circle Jamal belongs to is in a federal penitentiary." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I did not cry. I did not scream. I just felt a profound, chilling clarity. I drove straight back to my house. I walked into my home office, locked the door, and sat down at my heavy mahogany desk. I reached into my bag and pulled out my heavily encrypted work laptop. The screen glowed brightly in the dim room as I entered my security credentials. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to hunt. I booted up my firm's proprietary forensic software. As a senior auditor, my access level was practically limitless when it came to public financial records, SEC filings, and global corporate registries. I pulled up Jamal's professional profile first. According to his glossy company bio, he managed high net worth portfolios for over 50 elite clients. He presented himself as a conservative, old-school wealth manager who favored municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks. It was the perfect cover for a man with a gambling problem. Fraud leaves a digital footprint. Always. People like Jamal think they are smarter than the system because they wear expensive suits and use complex financial jargon to confuse their clients. But numbers do not lie, and they certainly do not care about your social status. I started by pulling the public disclosures for his top 3 corporate clients. Then I ran a cross-matching algorithm looking for secondary business entities registered under his name, my sister's name, or any slight variations of their initials. For the first 2 hours, the screen yielded nothing but clean, perfectly balanced ledgers. Jamal was careful. But careful people get tired, and when they get tired, they get lazy. I widened the search parameters, running a deep database sweep for limited liability companies registered in tax haven states like Delaware and Nevada within the last 36 months. That is when the system pinged. A company called Blue Horizon Holdings popped up. It was registered in Delaware exactly 2 years ago. The registered agent was a generic corporate services firm, but the initial filing fees had been paid by a credit card linked to a post office box in our exact zip code. I dug deeper into Blue Horizon. It had no website, no physical office, and 0 payroll. Yet, over the past 18 months, it had received dozens of wire transfers just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold from various accounts associated with Jamal's wealth management firm. He was structuring. It is the oldest trick in the money laundering playbook. He was siphoning funds from his clients' portfolios in increments small enough to bypass automatic compliance flags. I exported the transfer logs and built a timeline. The frequency of the transfers was increasing, turning from a slow drip into a desperate stream. But where was the money going? I traced the outbound wires from Blue Horizon. They were not going to luxury car dealerships or real estate holding companies. They were being funneled into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange based in the Cayman Islands. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces snapped into place. Jamal was not just stealing. He was gambling on highly volatile, unregulated digital assets. I ran a blockchain analysis tool to follow the wallet addresses associated with his offshore account. The ledger was an absolute bloodbath. Over the last year, Jamal had heavily leveraged his stolen client funds into a series of catastrophic crypto margin trades. Every time the market dipped, he doubled down, convinced he could win it all back. He had not just lost a little bit of money, he had incinerated it. I pulled up my calculator program and started tallying the confirmed losses from his primary crypto wallets: 5 million, 8 million, 10 million. The final number rested just above $12 million. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The sheer scale of his arrogance was breathtaking. He had stolen $12 million from some of the most powerful litigious investors in the city. If his firm found out, he would not just lose his job, he would face decades in a federal penitentiary. If his clients found out before the authorities did, he might face a much worse fate. This was why he was suddenly so desperate to adopt my daughter. It had absolutely nothing to do with Brittany wanting to be a mother or securing their social status at country club dinners. That was just the lie my parents swallowed to justify their cruelty. Jamal was out of time. The crypto market had crashed, his clients' quarterly statements were due soon, and he needed a massive immediate injection of liquid cash to replace the stolen funds before the federal auditors knocked on his corporate door. He needed millions, and he needed it fast. My mind instantly jumped to my late grandfather's estate. I had never cared about the family money, but I knew the trust existed. I opened an encrypted window and began searching the county probate court records for my grandfather's original trust documents. I needed to see exactly what Jamal saw. I needed to find the specific legal loophole that made my 10-year-old daughter the golden key to his multi-million-dollar bailout. I closed the probate portal just as my cell phone chimed with a high-pitched emergency alert. It was an automated text message from the administrative office at Lily's elementary school. The text read, "Early dismissal approved. Student Lily has been signed out by authorized emergency contact Brittany." My blood ran ice cold. I grabbed my car keys and sprinted out the front door. The drive to the elementary school usually took 15 minutes, but I made it in 7, ignoring speed limits and blaring my horn at anyone in my way. I swerved into the school parking lot and immediately spotted my sister's gleaming white Mercedes SUV idling near the front entrance. Brittany was aggressively marching down the concrete steps of the main office, tightly gripping Lily's small wrist. My daughter was dragging her feet, her backpack slipping off her shoulder, looking terrified and confused. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal and cut the steering wheel hard. My sedan lurched forward and skidded to a halt, directly across the exit lane, completely boxing in the Mercedes. There was no way Brittany could drive around me without crashing into a brick retaining wall. I jumped out of the car and sprinted toward them. "Let go of my daughter right now," I demanded, my voice echoing across the quiet suburban parking lot. Brittany jumped, startled by my sudden appearance, but she quickly recovered, puffing out her chest. She yanked Lily closer to her designer coat. "Back off, Vanessa," Brittany snapped, waving a thick stack of stapled legal documents in my face. "I have a court order, temporary emergency guardianship. Judge Thomas Mitchell signed it this morning. You are legally required to hand her over." I recognized the judge's name immediately. Judge Mitchell was a regular at the country club. My father, Richard, had quietly funded Mitchell's entire re-election campaign 2 years ago. Jamal and Richard had actually managed to leverage a corrupt family court judge to rubber stamp a fraudulent emergency petition without ever holding a hearing or notifying me. Mommy Lily cried out, trying to pull her arm free from her aunt's tight grip. "She is hurting my wrist." That was all it took. I did not care about the forged documents or the corrupt judge. I stepped directly into Brittany's personal space, grabbed her wrist with my left hand, and squeezed the pressure point over her radial bone with terrifying force. Brittany shrieked in pain and instinctively released her grip. I pulled Lily behind me, shielding her body with my own. "Go sit in my car and lock the doors, sweetie," I told Lily, never taking my eyes off my sister. Lily scrambled into the back seat of my sedan and pressed the lock button. Brittany cradled her wrist, her perfectly manicured facade crumbling into pure rage. "Are you crazy?" she screamed, her voice cracking as a few parents walking toward the school stopped to stare. "You just assaulted me. I have legal custody of that child. You are an unfit mother. You are financially unstable, emotionally erratic, and you cannot even afford to keep her in the lifestyle she belongs in. Jamal and I are saving her from your pathetic, miserable life." I pulled my phone out and dialed 911. I put the phone on speaker and held it up. "Yes, operator," I said calmly. "I need police officers dispatched to the elementary school immediately. A woman is attempting to kidnap my 10-year-old daughter using forged legal documents." Brittany opened her eyes wide with panic. "You cannot call the cops. she hissed, stepping toward me before realizing I was not backing down. I have a signed court order from a sitting judge. The police will arrest you for interfering with a lawful transfer of custody. You are going to end up in handcuffs in front of your own child, Vanessa. You are completely delusional. The operator confirmed officers were en route. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Let me explain exactly what is going to happen when the police arrive. I told Brittany, my tone deadly quiet. I am going to show them my driver's license. I am going to show them Lily's original birth certificate, which I keep saved on my phone. And then I'm going to ask the officers to call the courthouse and verify your temporary guardianship paper with the county clerk's office. Brittany swallowed hard, her confidence wavering. Because I know how the legal system works. I continued stepping closer, so the gathering crowd of parents could not hear my next words. I know that a judge cannot legally grant an ex parte emergency custody order without a sworn affidavit proving immediate physical danger. Which means Jamal either perjured himself on a federal affidavit, or Judge Mitchell bypassed the electronic filing system entirely to hand you a physical copy. If it is not in the county digital registry, that piece of paper in your hand is legally classified as a fraudulent document used in the commission of an attempted kidnapping. Brittany looked down at the documents in her hand as if they had suddenly caught fire. The distant sound of police sirens began to wail down the main avenue, growing louder by the second. The flashing blue lights reflected off the windshield of her luxury car. She realized she had walked directly into a trap she was not smart enough to understand. My sister was used to getting her way by throwing tantrums and relying on our parents' money, but money could not stop the patrol cars turning into the parking lot. This was the real world, and I was holding all the cards. The wail of the police sirens grew deafening, bouncing off the brick walls of the elementary school. Brittany stood frozen on the concrete, her manicured fingers trembling as she clutched the fraudulent court documents. The arrogant, untouchable golden child of the family was suddenly hyperventilating. She looked frantically toward the main road, watching the flashing blue and red lights approaching the parking lot entrance. "Vanessa, please!" Brittany begged, her voice dropping its haughty edge and taking on a pathetic, desperate whine. "You have to call them off. Tell dispatch it was a misunderstanding. If the police look at these papers, Jamal and I are ruined." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I did not unlock it to call the police dispatcher. Instead, I swiped open the voice memo application. I pressed the red record button, holding the phone casually at my side, completely hidden by the folds of my jacket. I stepped a little closer to my sister, making sure the microphone would capture every single word she was about to say. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, keeping my tone intentionally soft and pleading, acting as if I was genuinely confused and vulnerable. "Why do you want Lily so badly? You have never even liked my daughter. You skipped her last 3 birthday parties. You complained when she sat next to you at Thanksgiving. You do not want to be a mother. So why are you going to such illegal lengths to steal my child?" The question hit her exactly where I intended. It struck the fragile, overinflated balloon of her ego. Brittany was entirely unequipped to handle extreme stress, and under pressure, her facade always shattered into raw, ugly entitlement. She threw her hands up in the air, the fake court documents fluttering in her grip. "Are you really this stupid?" She snapped, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Do you honestly think I want to spend the rest of my life raising your brat? I do not want to go to parent-teacher conferences. I do not want a kid ruining my figure or my house." Then why I pressed, taking another step forward. "Because of the trust fund, you idiot!" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Grandfather's $15 million trust fund. He set a ridiculous condition before he died. The money only unlocks when a granddaughter named Brittany turns 10 years old. I cannot have kids. The money is just sitting there in an account mocking us." She was breathing heavily, tears of absolute panic streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "Jamal needs that cash right now." Brittany confessed, the words spilling out of her mouth like a broken dam. "He made some bad trades. He lost a lot of client money. If we do not get that $15 million transferred into our accounts by Friday, the federal regulators are going to find out. Jamal is going to federal prison, Vanessa. They will take our house. They will take my cars. I will be poor. We need your daughter named Brittany today so we can claim the trust tomorrow. That is the only reason we are doing this." I stared at her, letting the sheer magnitude of her vile confession hang in the cold air between us. She had just admitted to a criminal conspiracy. She admitted that she and her husband were attempting to kidnap a minor, commit identity fraud, and manipulate a legal trust fund to cover up a multi-million-dollar federal crime. I reached down and tapped the red square on my phone screen. The recording was saved and automatically uploaded to my secure cloud server. 2 police cruisers swerved into the school parking lot, their tires screeching as they blocked the exits. 4 officers jumped out, resting their hands on their duty belts as they approached us. Brittany gasped suddenly, realizing that her hysterical rant had carried across the empty lot. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. "Please," she whispered, "do not tell them." I looked at my sister, feeling absolutely nothing but contempt. I turned to the approaching officers. "Good afternoon, officers," I said calmly. "I am the one who called. This woman is attempting to remove my daughter from school premises using falsified legal documents. I highly recommend you run the docket number on those papers through the county clerk database immediately." One of the officers approached Brittany, holding out his hand for the documents. Brittany was shaking so hard she could barely hand them over. I did not wait to watch her try to lie her way out of it. I turned my back on her and walked over to my car. I unlocked the doors and got into the driver's seat. It was time to find out exactly what my grandfather had written in his trust. I pulled into my driveway, the adrenaline from the school parking lot still coursing through my veins. I parked the car and helped Lily inside, locking the heavy oak front door behind us. I made her a snack, turned on her favorite movie in the living room, and assured her everything was completely fine. Once she was settled, I walked back into my home office and locked the door. I sat down at my desk, opened my encrypted laptop, and immediately logged into the county probate court portal. My grandfather passed away 6 years ago. He was a ruthless corporate raider who built a massive fortune and ruled our family with an iron fist. He always favored Brittany. He loved her superficial charm and her willingness to manipulate people, traits he considered essential for survival in high society. When he died, the estate was kept highly confidential, but as a direct descendant, I had the legal right to request the unredacted filings. I paid the expedited digital access fee and downloaded the massive PDF file containing his last will and testament, along with the establishing documents for his various family trusts. I bypassed the standard bequests. I knew he left the primary estate to my parents. I was looking for the specific financial vehicle Brittany was screaming about in the parking lot. I used the search function to scan the document for her name. The software highlighted a section buried deep on page 47. It was an irrevocable generation-skipping trust. The principal amount listed was exactly $15 million. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. The terms of the trust were bizarre, but entirely characteristic of my grandfather's controlling nature. He wanted his legacy to continue through his favorite granddaughter, but he wanted to dictate exactly how it happened. The trust stipulated that the $15 million would remain locked in a high-yield investment account, untouched by anyone including my parents. The funds would only be dispersed upon a very specific triggering event. Brittany had to produce a biological or legally adopted daughter. And that daughter had to be legally named Brittany Junior. But that was not the only condition. My grandfather was notoriously suspicious of people marrying into the family for money. To ensure the child was actually being raised in the family tradition and not just used for a quick payout, he added a chronological fail-safe. The trust would not unlock upon the child's birth or adoption. The money would only be released on the child's 10th birthday. The sheer deviousness of the plan washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen as all the puzzle pieces violently snapped together. Lily just turned 10 years old. Yesterday was her actual birthday. That was why they brought the custom embroidered dress to the barbecue. That was why they filed the emergency custody and name change petitions at the exact same time. Jamal did not just stumble into a bad crypto trade yesterday. He had been drowning in debt for months. He and Brittany must have known about this specific clause in the trust for years. When they realized Brittany was infertile and could not produce an heir to unlock the money, they turned their sights on my daughter. They bided their time waiting until Lily was exactly the right age. If they could force an adoption and change her name on paper this week, they could present the newly minted court documents to the trust executor by Friday. The executor would see a legally adopted daughter named Brittany Junior, who was 10 years old. The conditions would be met. The $15 million would be immediately wired into a joint account controlled by Brittany and Jamal. Jamal would take the money, quietly replace the $12 million he stole from his wealthy clients, and use the remaining $3 million to continue funding his lavish lifestyle. My father, Richard, had orchestrated the entire legal strategy. He paid off the corrupt family court judge to push the paperwork through without a hearing. My parents were willing to completely strip my daughter of her identity, steal her away from her loving mother, and hand her over to a desperate criminal, all to protect the family reputation from the scandal of Jamal's impending federal indictment. They were perfectly willing to destroy my life to save his. It was a level of betrayal so profound, so intensely evil, that it completely eradicated any lingering sense of familial obligation I held in my heart. They were no longer my parents. They were no longer my sister and brother-in-law. They were hostile corporate entities attempting a hostile takeover of my most precious asset. My phone vibrated against the mahogany desk, snapping me out of my thoughts. It was a text message from my father. "Meet me at the Oakbridge Country Club in 30 minutes. Come alone." It was not a request. It was a summons from a man who was entirely used to having his orders followed without question. Normally, I would have ignored it, but now that I knew exactly what they were trying to steal, I wanted to look him in the eye. I wanted to see the exact moment he realized his obedient daughter was dead. I left Lily safely at home with my trusted next-door neighbor and drove across town to the sprawling, hyper-exclusive Oakbridge Country Club. My father had been a member here for 40 years. It was a fortress of old money leather armchairs and quiet, corrupt deals made over expensive scotch. I walked past the concierge, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floors. I found Richard sitting alone in the dim, wood-paneled private lounge at the back of the clubhouse. He was wearing his tailored golf attire, sipping a glass of neat whiskey. He looked relaxed, as if he had not orchestrated an illegal attempt to kidnap his granddaughter earlier today. "Sit down, Vanessa," he said, gesturing to the heavy leather chair across the small table. He did not look angry. He looked like a CEO preparing to negotiate a corporate merger. I remained standing. "I do not have time to sit, Richard. Say whatever it is you brought me here to say." He sighed, shaking his head with a patronizing smile. "You always had to make things so difficult. Your sister called me from the elementary school in hysterics. You really overreacted today. But I am a pragmatic man. I understand you felt cornered. So I am going to make this very simple and very fair for everyone involved." He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket, pulled out a pristine checkbook, and clicked his gold pen. He scribbled a few lines, tore the check from the binding, and slid it across the polished mahogany table toward me. The numbers were written in his bold, aggressive handwriting. $200,000. "Take the money," Richard said softly, leaning back in his expensive leather chair and swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Take the money and sign the name change and adoption papers by tomorrow morning. It is just on paper, Vanessa. You can still see Lily on weekends. You can use this money to pay off your mortgage or take a nice long vacation. Do not be stubborn about this." I stared down at the check. "You want to buy my daughter for $200,000? I asked, my voice dangerously flat. "Do not be dramatic," he countered smoothly. "I am compensating you for your cooperation." Jamal made a mistake. A very expensive mistake. If the federal regulators look at his ledgers, he is going to federal prison. Brittany will be ruined. The family name will be dragged through the mud. We cannot allow that to happen. The trust fund money is just sitting there. Your grandfather wanted Brittany to have it anyway. We are just accelerating the process. "By committing federal wire fraud, identity theft, and extortion," I replied, my tone icy. It is only a crime if someone complains. Richard sneered, his mask of civility slipping to reveal the ruthless manipulator underneath. You are a widow with a mediocre accounting job. You cannot fight my lawyers. If you refuse this offer, Jamal will make sure you lose your job. I will make sure you lose your house. We will drag you through family court until you are completely bankrupt and broken. Take the deal, Vanessa. Do not ruin Jamal's life just to prove a point. I looked at my father. I looked at the man perfectly willing to sacrifice his own flesh and blood to protect the reputation of a criminal. I reached down and slowly picked up the heavy paper check. Richard smiled arrogantly, assuming I had finally recognized my place and completely surrendered. Instead of putting the check in my purse, I gripped the edges and slowly, deliberately tore it directly in half. Richard's smile instantly vanished. I put the two torn halves together and forcefully tore them again, ripping his bribe into small, jagged pieces. Without breaking eye contact, I dropped the shredded pieces of paper directly into his glass of expensive whiskey. You fundamentally misunderstand the situation, Richard, I said, leaning over the table. I am not the one who is cornered. You do not have enough money to buy my daughter, and you do not have enough lawyers to save Jamal from what is coming. I turned my back on him and walked out of the dark lounge. I left him sitting there in absolute stunned silence, staring down at the ruined paper-filled whiskey. It was time to finally go to war. The next morning, I drove to the downtown financial district, my mind completely focused on the meticulous process of drafting a federal whistleblower report. The traffic was heavy, but I barely noticed the sea of brake lights. I was mentally outlining the exact legal statutes Jamal had violated, preparing to use my office resources to formally submit the irrefutable evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I parked in the underground garage of my corporate accounting firm, ready to end this nightmare. But the moment I stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor, I knew something was horribly wrong. The usual morning hum of the office was absent. The receptionist would not meet my eyes, suddenly finding her keyboard incredibly fascinating. When I approached the heavy glass doors of my department, my keycard flashed red. Access denied. A cold sense of foreboding washed over me. Before I could ask the receptionist to override the security system, the heavy wooden door to the executive suite opened. My department head, a stern and deeply analytical man named Mr. Campbell, stepped out. He did not offer his usual morning greeting or a polite smile. "Vanessa, we need you in the senior partner's office right now," Mr. Campbell said, his voice completely devoid of warmth. He gestured for me to follow him down the long carpeted hallway. I did not ask why. In the corporate forensic accounting world, an immediate summons to the senior partner's office accompanied by a deactivated security badge meant only one thing: you were being investigated, and you were likely being fired. I walked behind him, keeping my posture straight and my face completely impassive. We entered the sprawling corner office of the managing partner. A woman from Human Resources was already sitting at the conference table, a thick manila folder resting ominously in front of her. Mr. Campbell closed the door behind us, the heavy click of the lock echoing in the quiet room. "Have a seat, Vanessa," Mr. Campbell instructed, pointing to the leather chair opposite the Human Resources representative. I sat down, placing my briefcase on the floor next to my feet. Mr. Campbell walked around his large oak desk and remained standing, looking down at me with an expression of profound professional disappointment. "Late last night, our firm received a highly detailed anonymous whistleblower complaint directed specifically at you." He began, his tone strictly administrative. "The complaint included digital logs and forged financial ledgers indicating that you have been using our proprietary forensic software to embezzle funds from our mid-tier corporate clients. The anonymous source claims you have been quietly siphoning small amounts of cash into offshore accounts over the past 6 months to cover massive personal debts." Mr. Campbell continued, sliding a few printed pages across the desk toward me. I glanced down at the papers. They were incredibly well fabricated. Jamal had clearly hired someone with high-level access to mock-up network addresses and transaction hashes that closely mirrored my daily login patterns. He even included a fake financial dossier suggesting I was facing foreclosure on my home, painting a pathetic picture of a desperate widow resorting to corporate theft. It was a perfect mirror image of his own pathetic reality. Jamal had likely spent the entire night orchestrating this hit. He knew that as long as I had my job, I had the financial stability to fight him in court. More importantly, he knew I had the digital tools to completely expose his massive fraud to the world. So he decided to strike the heart of my independence. Vanessa, you know how seriously we take the integrity of our auditors? The human resources representative chimed in, her voice flat and rehearsed. Given your access to sensitive corporate financial data, we cannot afford to ignore these allegations. While we are conducting our own internal review to verify these claims, company policy dictates that we must take immediate action to protect our clients. You are being placed on indefinite administrative leave effective immediately. We are required to confiscate your company laptop, your phone, and your access badges. If the internal investigation confirms these allegations, you will face immediate termination, and we will turn the findings over to law enforcement. You will also be barred from practicing accounting in this state. They were taking everything. Jamal was trying to completely disarm me. Without my company laptop, I would lose access to the encrypted cloud servers where I stored the blockchain analysis, proving he had lost $12 million of his clients' money. Jamal thought he had backed me into an inescapable corner. He wanted me to call my father crying and defeated, willing to trade Lily for a chance to clear my name. I looked at Mr. Campbell, and then I looked at the human resources representative. They expected me to panic. They expected me to mount a desperate, tearful defense pleading for my job. I did not do any of those things. I reached down and picked up my leather briefcase. I placed it squarely on the polished surface of the conference table and popped the brass latches. The sharp metallic clicks sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. I was not going to let Jamal destroy my career to save his own skin. It was time to show them exactly why I was the best forensic accountant in the building. I lifted the heavy lid of my briefcase. The human resources representative shifted uncomfortably in her seat, likely expecting me to pull out a box of tissues or a desperate resignation letter. Instead, I withdrew a massive 300-page physical dossier. I had spent the entire night printing and binding every single digital footprint I uncovered. I knew Jamal would try to sever my access to the company's servers, so I brought the hard copies. I slid the thick binder across the polished mahogany table until it rested directly in front of Mr. Campbell. "What is this?" Mr. Campbell asked, eyeing the binder with cautious suspicion. "That is the real whistleblower report," I stated, keeping my voice steady and commanding. "The anonymous complaint you received this morning was a fabricated distraction designed to silence me. The man who sent it is Jamal, a senior wealth manager at Apex Capital. He is also my brother-in-law. Over the last 18 months, Jamal has embezzled exactly $12.4 million from his high-net-worth clients to cover catastrophic losses in offshore cryptocurrency markets." The human resources representative frowned, leaning forward aggressively. "Vanessa, this is a transparent distraction from the serious allegations against you." She began using her strict administrative tone. "We are not here to discuss your family disputes or wild conspiracy theories." I ignored her and kept my eyes locked on my department head. "Open the binder, Mr. Campbell," I urged softly. "Look at the client list on page 4. Look at the names of the people Jamal has been stealing from." Mr. Campbell hesitated for a fraction of a second before flipping the heavy cover open. The room went completely silent. I watched his eyes scan the list of defrauded investors. I knew exactly what he was seeing. 3 of the individuals Jamal had stolen from were not just Apex Capital clients. They were mutual clients. They were billionaire real estate developers and tech executives whose corporate taxes and personal wealth audits were handled exclusively by our firm. If our clients found out they had been robbed blind while we were supposed to be monitoring their financial health, our firm would face massive malpractice lawsuits. Mr. Campbell's face turned a pale, sickly shade of white. He quickly flipped through the following pages, his eyes darting across the wire transfer logs, the shell company registration documents for Blue Horizon Holdings, and the blockchain ledgers tracing the stolen funds directly to the Cayman Islands. He is structuring the withdrawals in increments just under $10,000 to avoid automatic federal reporting, Mr. Campbell whispered, tracing his finger over the printed spreadsheets. The methodology is sloppy, but the volume is absolutely staggering. This is a massive federal crime. And he is panicking, I added, leaning forward. He needs a sudden influx of cash to replace the stolen principal before the quarterly federal filings. He is attempting to illegally adopt my 10-year-old daughter to unlock a $15 million family trust fund. When I blocked the fraudulent adoption yesterday, he sent that fake complaint to get me fired, hoping I would lose my financial resources and surrender my child out of pure desperation. Mr. Campbell closed the binder. He took a deep breath, removing his silver-rimmed glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. The stern administrative mask he wore just moments ago completely vanished. He looked directly at the human resources representative. Tear up the suspension paperwork, he ordered sharply. Reactivate her keycard and unfreeze her network access immediately. The representative looked genuinely shocked. But sir, standard company policy dictates that we must investigate. She started to protest. To hell with company policy! Mr. Campbell snapped, his voice echoing loudly in the large executive office. This woman just saved our firm from a multi-million-dollar liability nightmare. If Jamal goes down and takes our mutual client's money with him, the fallout would destroy our reputation in the financial district. We are going to be the ones who catch him. We are going to hand this criminal over on a silver platter. Mr. Campbell turned back to me, a fierce, predatory gleam in his eye. You are not suspended, Vanessa. In fact, I am pulling you off all your regular accounts. Your only job right now is to nail this arrogant bastard to the wall. I am giving you unlimited access to our senior legal counsel. I want our most ruthless corporate lawyers helping you draft the official SEC whistleblower submissions by this afternoon. We will help you build an airtight case for the FBI. Nobody threatens an auditor in my department and gets away with it. A wave of immense relief and vindication washed over me. Jamal thought stripping away my family would leave me isolated and weak. He thought leveraging his corporate power would easily crush a single mother. But he had fundamentally misunderstood the loyalty of the financial world. I was no longer fighting alone. I had just weaponized one of the most powerful accounting firms in the city, and we were about to go to war. Mr. Campbell moved quickly to protect our mutual clients. By noon, I was relocated to a highly secure conference room on the top floor. The space was normally reserved for multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers, but now it was my personal war room. 4 of the firm's most aggressive corporate litigators were assigned to assist me. We locked the heavy glass doors, ordered a massive pot of black coffee, and fired up our encrypted laptops. The hunt was officially sanctioned, and I had an army of legal experts at my disposal to ensure Jamal never saw daylight again. I was ready to ruin his life, ready to. The next 48 hours blurred into a relentless adrenaline-fueled marathon. While the rest of the city slept, the fluorescent lights in our war room burned bright. I stood in front of a massive digital whiteboard, mapping out Jamal's complex web of financial deceit. I traced every single dime he had stolen from his high-net-worth clients. I linked the fraudulent withdrawals from Apex Capital directly to the Delaware shell company, Blue Horizon Holdings. The lawyers worked alongside me, drafting supporting affidavits and verifying federal statutes. We did not just find the $12 million. We tracked the exact IP addresses Jamal used to initiate the wire transfers, matching the timestamps directly to his corporate network login credentials. He had literally stolen millions while sitting comfortably at his desk during normal office hours, sipping his expensive corporate coffee. Jamal thought moving the stolen funds into an offshore cryptocurrency exchange would make them invisible to traditional banking oversight. He relied on the myth of digital anonymity. But digital ledgers are permanent and entirely public if you know how to read them. I ran advanced blockchain analytics matching the wallet addresses in the Cayman Islands to an account registered under a fabricated corporate entity. I dug through the incorporation documents and found that the fake entity shared a physical mailing address with a commercial property owned by my father, Richard. The sheer arrogance of the setup was staggering. Jamal was using his connection to my family to anchor his criminal enterprise. Every trade Jamal made, every catastrophic loss he incurred when the crypto market dipped, was meticulously documented, time-stamped, and printed out into undeniable hard copy evidence. Whenever my eyes grew heavy, I thought about Lily. I thought about the terrified look on her face when Brittany grabbed her wrist in the school parking lot. That memory was all the fuel I needed. With the financial autopsy complete, it was time to draft the execution orders. I sat down at my laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I prepared the official whistleblower submission for the Securities and Exchange Commission. The SEC does not take anonymous tips lightly, but a thoroughly documented report from a senior auditor at a top-tier corporate firm is treated as absolute gospel. I laid out the exact mechanisms of Jamal's fraud, highlighting his violation of fiduciary duty and his systemic abuse of client trust. The lawyers reviewed every sentence carefully, ensuring the language was completely airtight and legally devastating. But the SEC was only the first warhead in our arsenal. I opened a second document and began drafting an expedited report for the Internal Revenue Service. Arrogant criminals often forget that illegally obtained money is still subject to federal taxation. By failing to report the $12 million he embezzled as income, Jamal had committed massive, undeniable tax evasion. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is notoriously aggressive, and they possess the unilateral authority to freeze assets and seize properties without waiting for a lengthy trial. I detailed his offshore tax havens and the structured deposits, handing the federal agents the absolute perfect open and shut case of deliberate tax fraud. They would strip him of his expensive house, his cars, and his custom suits before he even stepped inside a federal courtroom. By dawn on Thursday, the nuclear code was fully compiled. The final package was a sprawling masterpiece of forensic accounting. It was over 500 pages of certified bank statements, IP logs, encrypted emails, and federal statutes, all bound in a thick black binder. Mr. Campbell walked into the conference room holding 2 fresh cups of coffee. He looked at the massive stack of evidence resting in the center of the table and smiled a grim, satisfied smile. We had forged the ultimate weapon. Now we just needed the perfect opportunity to detonate it for maximum collateral damage. We needed a public setting where he could not hide behind his expensive lawyers. And as if on cue, my cell phone vibrated loudly on the table, displaying a new email notification from my mother that would provide the exact stage I needed to end this war for good. I tapped the screen of my phone, opening the new email from my mother. It was not a message of reconciliation or an apology for her horrific behavior. It was an extravagant, digitally animated invitation to the annual Oakbridge Country Club Charity Gala. The digital envelope opened with a flourish, revealing ornate gold lettering against a stark black background. My parents hosted this event every year. It was their crown jewel of social posturing, a glittering evening where the wealthiest families, corporate executives, and local politicians gathered to drink champagne and pretend they actually cared about philanthropy. It was exactly the kind of high society event Jamal used to prospect for new wealthy clients. I scrolled past the lavish details about the catered dinner and the silent auction. At the very bottom of the email, hidden beneath the formal dress code requirements, was a personalized note from Susan. The tone was sickeningly smug, radiating the absolute confidence of a woman who believed she held all the power. The message was brief and completely devoid of any maternal affection. It read, "Vanessa, this is your last chance to sign the papers. Bring the executed documents to the gala tomorrow night. If you do not comply, my lawyers will take Lily by force on Monday morning. Do not embarrass us." I read the words again, letting the sheer audacity of her threat settle into my mind. She honestly believed she could simply summon me to a ballroom, surround me with her wealthy friends, and force me to hand over my 10-year-old daughter like a piece of unwanted luggage. She thought the threat of aggressive litigation would break my spirit over the weekend. Susan and Richard were so accustomed to buying their way out of problems that they could not fathom a reality where their money was utterly useless. They assumed I was sitting at home crying frantically, trying to figure out how to afford a defense attorney. They had no idea that I had just spent the last 2 days inside a secure corporate war room, backed by some of the most ruthless litigators in the city. They had no idea that I had already completely dismantled Jamal's criminal empire piece by piece. I clicked the reply button on the email. I did not type out a lengthy defense. I did not beg for mercy or try to appeal to whatever tiny shred of humanity my mother might have left. I typed a single decisive word: yes. I hit send, confirming my attendance, and locked my phone. If they wanted a public spectacle, I was more than happy to oblige. I closed my laptop and left the firm, thanking Mr. Campbell and the legal team for their relentless work. I drove straight to an upscale boutique downtown. For the past 3 years, I had dressed in muted colors, blending into the background, wearing the invisible uniform of a grieving widow. But tomorrow night, I was not going to be a victim. I was going to be an executioner. I needed armor. I selected a stunning emerald green evening gown that radiated confidence and power. I bought matching heels and booked an appointment to have my hair and makeup done. When I arrived home, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table drawing a picture. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. I called my neighbor, a retired school principal, who adored Lily, and asked her to watch her for the evening on Saturday. I explained that I had a very important work event that would run late. My neighbor happily agreed, unaware that the work event involved destroying my toxic family on a public stage. Friday passed in a blur of quiet anticipation. I printed a secondary copy of the forensic dossier, slipping the explosive documents into a sleek leather portfolio that I could easily carry alongside my evening bag. I reviewed the wire transfer logs, the offshore crypto account details, and the fraudulent custody filings one last time, committing every single number to memory. Jamal was going to try to humiliate me. He was going to use his physical presence and his expensive suit to intimidate me into signing away my child. Saturday evening finally arrived. The sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across my driveway. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing the emerald fabric of my gown. I looked completely different. The tired, overwhelmed mother was gone. In her place stood a highly trained forensic accountant holding a nuclear bomb. I picked up my keys and the leather portfolio. It was time to go to the gala. It was time to show them what happens when you try to steal from a woman who audits thieves for a living. I stepped out of my house and locked the front door, the cool evening air brushing against my emerald silk gown. I did not drive directly to the Oakbridge Country Club. I had one final crucial stop to make. Earlier that morning, my department head, Mr. Campbell, had utilized his extensive network to bypass the standard federal reporting queues. He arranged a direct off-the-books meeting for me with a senior investigator from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I pulled my sedan into the desolate, heavily monitored underground parking garage of the federal building downtown. A dark, unmarked SUV was idling in the corner of the concrete structure. As I approached, the driver's side door opened and Special Agent Thomas Reynolds stepped out. He was a tall, sharply dressed man with silver hair and the serious, unblinking gaze of someone who spent his entire career hunting down corporate sociopaths. I parked my car, grabbed my leather portfolio and a small encrypted titanium hard drive and walked over to him. My heels echoed loudly in the cavernous garage, a sharp contrast to the absolute silence of the federal agent. "Ms. Vanessa," Agent Reynolds said, extending a firm hand. "Mr. Campbell spoke very highly of your forensic capabilities. He said you have a completely wrapped package for us." I shook his hand and handed over the titanium hard drive. "Everything you need is on that drive," I stated, keeping my voice completely professional and devoid of any emotional waver. It contains over 500 pages of cross-referenced financial ledgers, offshore bank routing numbers, and direct IP address logs, linking $12.4 million in stolen client funds directly to Jamal. I have also included the forged court documents he filed this week in family court, proving he is actively attempting to extort a minor to access a family trust fund to cover his crypto losses. Agent Reynolds plugged the drive into a heavily encrypted federal tablet resting on the hood of his SUV. He tapped a few keys, bypassing the initial security protocols I had established for him. For several long minutes, the only sound in the garage was the low hum of the vehicle engine. I watched his eyes scan the digital documents. I knew exactly what he was seeing, the undeniable ironclad proof of a massive federal crime. A slow, appreciative smile crept across the agent's face. "You built an absolute masterpiece here," Agent Reynolds murmured, looking up from the screen. "Usually when we get a whistleblower report, it takes my team 6 months to subpoena the server logs and untangle the shell companies. You just handed me the entire spider web with the spider already trapped inside. We have enough probable cause right here to secure a federal arrest warrant for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft." "That brings me to the logistics of the arrest," I replied, stepping slightly closer. "Jamal is a massive flight risk. Once he realizes he cannot legally access my daughter's trust fund, he is going to panic. He holds a secondary passport and has liquid assets hidden in the Cayman Islands. If you send agents to his office on Monday morning, he might already be gone. You need to take him down tonight." Agent Reynolds crossed his arms. "Where is he tonight?" "He is currently attending the annual charity gala at the Oakbridge Country Club," I explained, pulling a physical copy of the event invitation from my leather portfolio and handing it to him. "My parents are hosting the event. Half of the investors Jamal stole from are in that ballroom right now sipping champagne. He will be wearing a custom tuxedo, feeling completely invincible. His cell phone, which contains the authenticator apps for his offshore crypto wallets, will be in his pocket. If you raid the gala, you secure the man, you secure the physical devices, and you completely eliminate his chance to flee." The federal agent studied the invitation, a calculating look in his eyes. "A public takedown at an elite country club is messy," he noted. "It will cause a massive scene. He tried to steal my 10-year-old daughter to cover his gambling debts," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. "I do not care if it gets messy. I want him in handcuffs in front of the exact high society crowd he values more than his own family." Agent Reynolds looked at my emerald gown, recognizing the absolute resolve of a mother who had been pushed past the point of no return. He closed his tablet and slipped the hard drive into his evidence lockbox. "What time are you scheduled to arrive?" Agent Reynolds asked. "I will enter the VIP room at exactly 8:30, I said. "Jamal and my parents will try to force me to sign the fraudulent adoption papers. I will keep them occupied." Agent Reynolds nodded sharply. "My tactical team will stage unmarked vehicles at the perimeter of the golf course by 8:15. When the clock strikes 8:45, we are coming through the front doors of that clubhouse. Make sure you are standing clear of the blast radius, Ms. Vanessa. I will be the one holding the detonator, I promised." I turned around, got back into my car, and finally steered my vehicle toward the Oakbridge Country Club. The trap was perfectly set. Now all I had to do was walk in and watch the rats take the bait. The drive to the Oakbridge Country Club took less than 20 minutes, but every second felt electric. I pulled my sedan up to the grand entrance, leaving it with a surprised valet among the fleet of luxury vehicles. I stepped out, smoothing the rich emerald silk of my gown. The heavy double doors of the clubhouse were propped open, spilling warm golden light and the soft sounds of a live string quartet out into the cool night air. I took a deep breath, clutching the leather portfolio tightly against my side, and walked up the wide stone steps. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in excessive wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant, sparkling glow over hundreds of the most influential people in the city. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd, carrying silver trays of champagne and caviar. The air was thick with the scent of high-end perfume and the low hum of wealthy people discussing their investment portfolios. As I walked down the curved grand staircase and stepped onto the ballroom floor, heads began to turn. For years I had attended these family events wearing dull colors, playing the role of the tragic invisible widow. Tonight, I was impossible to ignore. The emerald gown fit perfectly, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable confidence. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely unbothered as I navigated through the sea of designer dresses and custom-tailored suits. I recognized dozens of faces in the crowd. There were real estate developers, tech executives, and venture capitalists. These were not just my parents' wealthy friends. These were the exact people Jamal had been systematically robbing blind for the past 18 months. They were laughing and clinking their expensive crystal glasses, completely unaware that their retirement funds and corporate tax shelters had been incinerated in an offshore crypto market. It did not take long to spot my family. They were holding court near the center of the room, positioned next to the massive ice sculpture. My father Richard was laughing loudly at a joke told by a local politician. He wore a classic black tuxedo and radiated the arrogant authority of a man who believed he owned the building. Beside him stood my mother, Susan, dripping in heavy diamond jewelry that likely cost more than my house. Brittany was wearing a shimmering gold dress clinging tightly to Jamal's arm. Jamal looked incredibly pleased with himself. He was wearing his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, flashing his expensive watch, oblivious to the fact that his entire empire was about to collapse. Susan was the first to notice my approach. She tapped Richard's arm and the entire family turned to face me. I watched their expressions shift. For a brief second, there was genuine surprise at my appearance. But that surprise quickly melted into a unified, sickeningly smug look of absolute victory. They saw the leather portfolio in my hand. In their arrogant minds, that portfolio did not contain federal whistleblower reports and offshore bank ledgers. They thought it contained the signed adoption papers and the name change petition for my daughter. They thought I had broken under the pressure of their threats. I walked directly up to their circle. The local politician excused himself, sensing the sudden shift in the family dynamic. Richard smiled a wide, predatory smile. He looked at me like a conqueror looking at a defeated enemy. "Vanessa, you look surprisingly well put together tonight," Richard said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "I am so glad you decided to stop being stubborn and join us. Family is everything after all." Susan stepped forward, offering a fake, highly dramatic hug that I easily sidestepped. She leaned in close, her heavy perfume assaulting my senses, and whispered harshly in my ear. "I knew you would not risk losing your inheritance. Hand over the papers and try not to ruin the evening for your sister." Brittany beamed, looking me up and down with a condescending smirk. "It is the right choice, Vanessa. Do not worry. We will make sure Lily gets the best boarding school money can buy." Jamal stepped into my personal space, practically vibrating with arrogant triumph. "I told you my lawyers would crush you," he muttered softly, adjusting his silk tie. "You cannot fight real power. Let us get this over with." Richard gestured toward a set of heavy mahogany doors at the far end of the ballroom. "The private VIP room is already reserved for us," Richard announced smoothly. "Our legal counsel is waiting inside to finalize the documents. Shall we?" I looked closely at each of them, feeling the heavy weight of the paperwork I carried, knowing the federal countdown clock was ticking down fast. "Lead the way," I said simply. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind us, instantly silencing the vibrant string quartet and the buzzing chatter of the ballroom. The VIP room was suffocatingly opulent. Dark oak-paneled walls, thick Persian rugs, and a massive polished walnut conference table dominated the space. Sitting at the far end of the table were two men in identical charcoal gray suits. They were the family attorney's corporate attack dogs my father kept on a very expensive retainer. They did not stand when I entered. They simply stared at me with cold, calculating eyes, treating me not as a grieving widow or a family member, but as a minor legal obstacle to be swiftly removed. My father took his place at the head of the table, pulling out the grand leather chair, as if he were presiding over a board meeting. Susan and Brittany flanked him, both wearing identical expressions of smug anticipation. Jamal did not sit down. He paced the length of the room, his expensive leather shoes sinking into the plush rug. He was riding a high of pure arrogance, completely convinced that he had successfully trapped me. "Have a seat, Vanessa," my father ordered, gesturing to a solitary chair positioned deliberately on the opposite side of the table, directly facing the lawyers. It was a classic interrogation setup designed to make me feel small and isolated. The lighting in the room was intentionally dim, casting long shadows that made the space feel even more claustrophobic. I remained standing, my posture rigid and unyielding. "I prefer to stand," I replied calmly, setting my leather portfolio down on the smooth surface of the walnut table. Jamal stopped pacing. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh and walked over to the lawyers. One of the attorneys, a balding man with wire-rimmed glasses, slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table. Jamal picked them up, holding them as if they were a winning lottery ticket. He marched over to where I was standing and slammed the heavy stack of papers forcefully onto the desk right in front of me. The sharp smack echoed loudly in the soundproof room. "We are done playing games," Vanessa Jamal sneered, leaning over the table to invade my personal space. The top document was the petition for name change, and right beneath it was the emergency adoption consent form. Both pages had a bright yellow sticky note pointing exactly to where I needed to sign. "You are going to take the pen from my hand, and you are going to sign on every single yellow flag," Jamal commanded, his voice dripping with venom. "If you do not sign these papers tonight, I am going to make sure your life becomes a living hell. I already got you suspended from your job. I made one phone call and derailed your entire career. By Monday morning, I will finalize your termination. The bank holding your mortgage is managed by a close friend of mine. Without your salary, you will default, and he will accelerate the foreclosure process. Sign it or you are homeless by Tuesday." Susan sighed loudly, adjusting her diamond necklace as if the conversation was completely exhausting her. "Listen to him, Vanessa. Do not make this harder than it has to be. We have already arranged for a moving company to help you pack your things if you choose the difficult path. We can have Lily picked up by a private car service tomorrow afternoon. You will not have to explain anything to her. We will handle the transition smoothly like a proper family should." They were talking about taking my child as if they were discussing logistics for shipping a piece of antique furniture. The utter lack of basic human empathy was staggering. Brittany leaned forward, crossing her arms over her shimmering gold dress. "It is really for the best," she added, her voice laced with fake sympathy. "You are clearly unstable. A real mother would not have caused a scene at the elementary school. You cannot afford to give her the life she deserves anyway. Jamal and I will make sure she has the best tutors, the best clothes, and the best opportunities. You should be thanking us for stepping in to fix your absolute mess of a life." My father chimed in, pointing a finger at me. "I paid Judge Mitchell a significant amount of money to ensure those papers were expedited. The family court system is in my pocket, Vanessa. If you refuse to sign, I will drag you through years of litigation. I will bankrupt you. I will bury you in legal fees until you are begging us to take the child just so you can afford to eat." I looked at the two lawyers. They were entirely silent, watching the psychological abuse unfold with blank, practiced expressions. They were well paid to look the other way, while my family attempted to extort a mother into surrendering her child. Jamal pulled a heavy gold fountain pen from his tuxedo pocket and clicked the cap off. He thrust it toward me, the gold nib glinting under the crystal chandelier overhead. "Take the pen, Vanessa," he demanded, his face turning slightly red with aggressive impatience. "You have absolutely zero leverage. You have no job. You have no money. You have no allies. You are entirely alone in this room, and we hold all the cards. Sign the papers right now." I did not reach for the pen. I did not shrink back from his aggressive posturing. I stood perfectly still, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch across the room for several long seconds. I watched the arrogant confidence rolling off Jamal's shoulders. I watched my parents looking at me with cold disappointment. I watched my sister waiting eagerly to steal my daughter's identity for a payout. They honestly believed they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They had absolutely no idea that I was the one who locked the door. I did not reach for the pen. Instead, I reached into the sleek leather portfolio I had carried into the room. I took my time, letting the suffocating silence stretch. I pulled out my own stack of thick watermarked legal documents. They were not printed on standard office paper. They bore the official raised blue seal of the state superior court. I dropped them onto the walnut table right next to Jamal's fraudulent petitions. The sound was soft but carried a heavy weight that immediately shifted the energy in the room. I will not be signing anything tonight, Jamal. I said, my voice perfectly level and calm. In fact, I am the only person in this room who holds any actual legally binding paperwork. Jamal scoffed, leaning back slightly but keeping his aggressive stance. What is that, Vanessa? A strongly worded letter from a discount attorney you found on the internet. It is an active, fully executed emergency protective order, I stated clearly, shifting my gaze directly to my sister. Brittany's smug smile faltered instantly. Filed and granted this afternoon by a superior court judge. It mandates that you and Jamal must remain at least 500 feet away from my daughter and me at all times, effectively immediately. The balding lawyer with the wire-rimmed glasses sat up completely straight. His professional indifference vanished in a fraction of a second. He leaned forward, squinting at the raised court seal on the documents. On what grounds, the second lawyer demanded, his voice suddenly losing its arrogant edge. I turned my gaze to the lawyers, treating them with the exact same cold detachment they had just shown me. On the grounds of attempted kidnapping, criminal harassment, and the use of forged judicial documents. Yesterday afternoon, my sister attempted to remove my child from school premises using a temporary guardianship order, purportedly signed by Judge Mitchell. I informed the responding police officers that no such order existed in the county digital registry. Richard slammed his fist on the heavy wooden table. You called the police on your own sister. I did, I replied smoothly. And after the officers verified that the docket number was entirely fabricated, I filed a formal police report. Then I took that police report to a superior court judge who does not owe my father any political favors. When the judge saw that you had conspired to falsify a family court order to forcibly remove a minor from her legal guardian, he signed the restraining order immediately. The balding lawyer reached out with a trembling hand and carefully pulled my documents toward him. As he read the first page, a large bead of sweat formed on his forehead. He looked at Jamal, and then he looked at my father, his face rapidly draining of color. Richard, did you authorize the creation of a physical guardianship petition outside of the electronic filing system? The lawyer asked, his voice tight with sudden, undeniable panic. Richard waved his hand dismissively. It was a tactical maneuver. We were going to file the digital copies on Monday after Vanessa signed the consent forms. It is a standard pressure tactic. It is a felony, the lawyer hissed, completely abandoning his composed professional demeanor. Falsifying a judge's signature and presenting it to a school official to take physical custody of a child is a federal offense. You did not tell us you actually tried to use the unfiled paperwork in public. Do not lecture me. Richard growled, his face turning a deep shade of purple. I pay you thousands of dollars an hour to fix problems, not to quote the law at me like a law school professor. I cannot fix a documented criminal conspiracy, the lawyer shot back, pulling a tailored handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his brow. If this protective order is active, my firm cannot legally advise you to pursue this adoption. It completely invalidates the consent forms Jamal just presented. In fact, just being in this room with you right now could jeopardize my license to practice law. The second lawyer pushed his chair back from the table, aggressively creating physical distance between himself and my family. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with a federal kidnapping charge. Jamal grabbed the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. He realized his primary weapon of intimidation had just been neutralized. The threat of bankrupting me in family court was gone, because a superior court judge had already categorized them as a physical threat to my child. You think a piece of paper is going to stop us? Jamal snarled, dropping the pretense of the concerned uncle entirely. You think a restraining order changes the fact that you have no money and no job? I still pulled your strings, Vanessa. I still got you fired. You have absolutely nothing. I smiled. It was the same predatory smile I had given him in the bank lobby. The trap was springing perfectly. The lawyers were terrified my father was losing control of his legal team, and Jamal was running blindly toward the edge of the cliff. You really should not brag about sabotaging an auditor, Jamal, I said softly, stepping closer to the table. Because while you were busy playing family court games, I was doing my job. I reached into the pocket of my emerald silk gown and pulled out my smartphone. I kept my eyes locked on Jamal as I slowly walked around the edge of the heavy walnut table. The two corporate attorneys instinctively pulled their chairs back desperately, trying to put physical distance between themselves and the impending disaster. I placed the phone flat in the center of the polished wood, the screen glowing brightly in the dim VIP room. "What is this?" My father demanded, his authoritative tone wavering for the first time. "Are you trying to record this conversation? Because as my lawyers will tell you, this is a two-party consent state." "I am not recording anything right now, Richard," I replied smoothly, "but I did record a very interesting conversation yesterday afternoon. You see, when Brittany ambushed me and my daughter in the elementary school parking lot, she was under a tremendous amount of stress. The flashing lights of the approaching police cruisers really broke her concentration. She forgot to filter her words. She forgot that out in the real world, outside the safety of this country club, you cannot just buy your way out of a criminal conspiracy." Brittany let out a sharp gasp. The color instantly drained from her perfectly contoured face. She took a stumbling step backward, her expensive gold heels sinking into the Persian rug. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling with sudden, undeniable terror. "You did not." I reached down and tapped the play button on my screen. I had set the volume to maximum. The audio quality was crystal clear, capturing the ambient noise of the school parking lot and the distant wail of police sirens. But rising above it all was Brittany's hysterical, screaming voice. The recording echoed violently off the dark oak-paneled walls of the VIP room. "Are you really this stupid?" Brittany's recorded voice shrieked. "Do you honestly think I want to spend the rest of my life raising your brat? I do not want to go to parent-teacher conferences. I do not want a kid ruining my figure or my house." Susan let out a choked cry, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. She stared at her golden child in absolute horror. The recording continued, delivering the fatal blow. "Because of the trust fund, you idiot. Grandfather's $15 million trust fund. He set a ridiculous condition before he died. The money only unlocks when a granddaughter named Brittany turns 10 years old. Jamal needs that cash right now. He made some bad trades. He lost a lot of client money. If we do not get that $15 million transferred into our accounts by Friday, the federal regulators are going to find out. Jamal is going to federal prison, Vanessa." I hit pause. The sudden silence in the VIP room was deafening. It felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the space. The balding attorney stood up so fast his heavy leather chair crashed to the floor behind him. He did not even bother picking it up. He frantically shoved his legal pads and gold pens into his briefcase. "Richard, we are officially withdrawing as your legal counsel." The lawyer stammered, his hands shaking violently. "This firm will not be party to a documented extortion attempt or a conspiracy to defraud a federal trust. Do not contact our offices again." The two lawyers bolted for the heavy mahogany doors, practically tripping over each other to escape the room. My father did not try to stop them. Richard stood frozen at the head of the table, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. The reality of the situation had finally pierced his arrogant armor. He realized he was no longer the puppet master orchestrating a clever family transaction. He was an unindicted co-conspirator, caught on tape attempting to cover up a multi-million-dollar federal crime. Susan swayed on her feet, looking as though she might actually faint. Her perfect high society facade completely crumbled. She turned to Jamal, her eyes wide with panic. "You told us it was just a minor liquidity issue," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You told us you just needed a short-term bridge loan from the trust to cover a bad quarter. Federal prison. What did you do, Jamal?" Jamal did not answer her. He was staring at my phone as if it were a live grenade. The arrogant, untouchable wealth manager who had threatened to make me homeless just 5 minutes ago was gone. His custom, Tom Ford tuxedo suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as the walls of his elaborate criminal empire completely collapsed inward. "You really thought you could steal my daughter to pay off your gambling debts?" I asked, stepping right up to the edge of the table. You thought a forged piece of paper and a few hollow threats would make me surrender my child so you could keep driving your Porsche and wearing your fancy watches. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. But I was not finished. The recording was just the appetizer. It was time to serve the main course. I reached into my leather portfolio and wrapped my fingers around the thick spine of the black binder. I pulled it out, letting it hit the table with a heavy thud. The sheer size of the 500-page document made Jamal step back. I picked it up and walked directly toward him. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting toward the mahogany doors, realizing he was trapped. I stopped inches from him. I did not raise my voice, but the certainty in my tone cut through the air. "You are short $12 million from the pension funds you manage, Jamal," I said, enunciating every single word so the truth could sink in. "You incinerated $12 million of your clients' money on offshore cryptocurrency margin calls, and you thought my daughter was your bailout." I lifted the massive binder and shoved it forcefully against his chest. Jamal brought his arms up to catch it, but the weight of the Securities and Exchange Commission audit made him stumble backward. He gasped, dropping the heavy binder onto the table, where it fell open, revealing page after page of highlighted wire transfers, IP logs, and offshore routing numbers. Jamal stared down at the open pages. His breath hitched in his throat. He reached up with trembling fingers and violently yanked at his custom silk tie, desperately trying to loosen his collar. A high-pitched wheezing sound escaped his lips. He was beginning to hyperventilate, his chest heaving rapidly as a full-blown panic attack seized his body. The arrogant facade was completely stripped away, leaving nothing but a terrified, broken criminal, realizing his entire life was over. "What is she talking about?" my father demanded, stepping toward the table. Richard looked at the spreadsheets, his eyes scanning the highlighted numbers. His face went completely slack. "These are the corporate accounts for the Apex Capital pension funds," Richard whispered, his voice trembling, as he recognized the names of his own wealthy friends on the defrauded client list. "Jamal, what did you do?" "I will tell you exactly what he did," I said, turning to face my father. "Your son-in-law set up a shell company in Delaware called Blue Horizon Holdings. He used it to slowly siphon client funds in increments just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. He transferred the money to the Cayman Islands and gambled it on unregulated digital assets. Every single dime is gone. He is completely broke." Brittany let out a loud, agonizing wail. She rushed over to the table and grabbed Jamal by the arm, shaking him. "Tell me she is lying!" Brittany screamed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "Tell me you did not lose our money. Tell me they are not going to take the house." Jamal could not speak. He was gasping for air, his eyes wide and unblinking as he stared at the financial autopsy of his own criminal enterprise. He leaned heavily against the table, his legs practically giving out beneath him. "It is not just your house, Brittany," I explained calmly, watching my sister completely unravel. "The federal government will seize everything purchased with those stolen funds. Your luxury cars, your designer bags, your jewelry, the bank accounts. The IRS Criminal Division is going to freeze all of your assets by Monday morning to begin restitution. You are not going to be sending my daughter to an elite boarding school. You are going to be standing in line at the public defender office trying to figure out how to keep your husband out of a federal penitentiary." Susan let out a horrifying sob and collapsed into one of the heavy leather chairs. The social standing she valued above everything else in the world, the reputation she was willing to sacrifice my daughter for, was about to be obliterated. She looked at Richard, her face a mask of pure terror. "Richard, do something," she pleaded. "Call someone, call the bank. We have to fix this before it gets out." I looked at my parents, feeling a profound sense of closure. They could not fix this. There was no amount of money or political leverage that could erase a $12 million federal embezzlement case that was already fully documented and handed over to the authorities. They had tied their legacy to a fraud, and now they were going down with him. But Jamal was the one who truly understood the gravity of the situation. He finally managed to catch his breath, looking up at me with eyes filled with pure, unadulterated fear. "You gave this to the authorities," he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. I did not just give it to them, Jamal, I replied, checking the time on my phone. I made sure they knew exactly where to find you tonight. I turned away from Jamal, leaving him gasping for air over the massive stack of incriminating evidence. I walked past my father, whose face was frozen in a mask of absolute horror, and headed straight for the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room. Richard finally found his voice, stepping forward to aggressively grab my arm. Vanessa, stop right now! Richard hissed, his fingers digging painfully into the silk of my gown. You cannot do this. We can still handle this internally. We will liquidate assets. We will pay the clients back quietly. Do not destroy this family over a misunderstanding. I yanked my arm out of his grasp with such force that he stumbled backward into the conference table. You destroyed this family the moment you tried to steal my daughter, I said, staring him down. Now I am just taking out the trash. I grabbed the brass handles and threw the heavy doors wide open. The vibrant sounds of the charity gala rushed into the suffocating VIP room. The string quartet had just taken a break, and the master of ceremonies was standing at a podium just a few feet away, preparing to announce the silent auction winners. A sleek wireless microphone sat resting in the silver stand. The ballroom was packed with the wealthiest people in the city, the exact people who had entrusted their entire fortunes to my brother-in-law. I walked out of the VIP room and stepped directly onto the low stage. The master of ceremonies gave me a confused look, attempting to block my path, but I did not wait for an invitation. I reached out and pulled the microphone firmly from the stand. The sharp squeal of audio feedback echoed through the massive ballroom, instantly slicing through the polite chatter and the clinking of crystal champagne glasses. Hundreds of faces turned toward the stage, their expressions shifting from mild annoyance to curious anticipation. I looked out over the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. I saw the faces of the tech executives and real estate tycoons whose names were explicitly listed in my forensic audit. I glanced back at the VIP room. Jamal was standing in the doorway, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. Brittany was gripping his arm, looking like she was about to vomit on her gold dress. My parents were frozen in the shadows of the room, terrified of the bright lights. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice projecting loud and clear through the state-of-the-art sound system. For those who do not know me, my name is Vanessa. I am Richard's daughter, and I am a senior forensic accountant. I apologize for interrupting the festivities, but there is an urgent financial matter that requires the immediate attention of several guests in this room tonight. The ballroom went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop on the polished marble floor. If you are currently a client of Apex Capital, specifically managed by Jamal, I need you to listen very carefully. I continued, making direct eye contact with a prominent venture capitalist standing in the front row. Over the last 18 months, your wealth manager has not been investing your money in conservative municipal bonds or blue-chip stocks. He has been systematically embezzling your funds through a Delaware shell company called Blue Horizon Holdings. A collective gasp ripped through the elite crowd. I saw 3 different billionaires instantly pull their smartphones out of their tuxedo pockets to check their banking apps. Jamal took a desperate step out of the VIP room, raising his hands as if to stop a speeding train. She is lying, he croaked, his voice barely carrying over the sudden panicked murmur of the crowd. She is a disgruntled family member. Do not listen to her, everything is fine. I am a forensic auditor who just handed a 500-page ledger of your offshore cryptocurrency margin calls to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I countered, my voice booming through the speakers and completely drowning him out. He stole $12.4 million of your money and incinerated it on unregulated digital assets. He is completely broke. The murmur turned into a low, angry roar. The venture capitalist in the front row dropped his champagne glass. It shattered violently on the floor, but nobody even flinched. But it gets worse, I said, projecting my voice even louder to cut through the rising chaos. To cover up his massive federal crimes, Jamal and my sister Brittany attempted to legally kidnap my 10-year-old daughter today. They forged court documents with the help of my father Richard, who funded a corrupt judge. Their plan was to force an illegal adoption and change my daughter's name to unlock a $15 million family trust fund before the SEC could audit Jamal's accounts. The crowd erupted into absolute pandemonium. The high society veneer of the charity gala was completely obliterated in a matter of seconds. Wealthy investors were shouting aggressively, dialing their attorneys on speakerphone, and demanding immediate answers. Several men in expensive suits began advancing toward the VIP room, their faces flushed with righteous rage. My parents stood paralyzed in the doorway, their pristine social reputation entirely dismantled in front of the only people they cared about. Susan hid her face behind her trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as her wealthy friends stared at her with absolute disgust. Richard looked like he was having a heart attack, clutching his chest as the reality of his public execution finally set in. Jamal realized the angry investors were closing in fast. He backed into the VIP room, desperately looking for a rear exit that did not exist. I stood on the stage holding the microphone, watching the absolute destruction of the people who thought they could ruin my life. I had burned their fake empire to the ground, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop the flames. I lowered the microphone and placed it carefully back onto the silver stand. The chaotic roar of the ballroom was deafening, a symphony of wealthy investors demanding immediate restitution and dialing their legal teams. I stepped off the low stage and walked slowly back toward the open mahogany doors of the VIP room. I did not run. I did not rush. I parted the angry crowd, effortlessly moving through the fury like a ghost. Inside the dim room, the reality of their destruction was sinking in, but my sister was not ready to surrender. Delusion is a powerful drug for a narcissist cornered by the truth. Brittany pushed past Jamal, her gold dress catching the light from the ballroom as she stepped aggressively into my path. Her face was streaked with black mascara, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate energy. "You think you have won?" Brittany screamed, her voice cracking, as she pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You think a bunch of angry rich people are going to stop us? Jamal might go to jail, but I am still getting that money. Grandfather left that trust fund for me. It has my name on it. I will hire my own lawyers. I will forge the adoption papers myself if I have to. The second I secure that $15 million, I will buy my way out of this mess and leave you with nothing." I stopped walking. I looked at my sister, watching her cling to the last remaining shred of her fractured reality. I did not feel anger anymore. I just felt a deep, profound pity for the hollow shell of a person standing in front of me. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. "You are not getting a single dime, Brittany," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady over the noise of the angry crowd behind me. She scoffed a desperate, breathless sound. "You do not control the trust, Vanessa. You cannot stop the executor from releasing my funds." "You are right," I replied, folding my arms across my emerald gown. "I do not control the executor. That is exactly why I paid him a visit yesterday morning while you and Jamal were busy playing family court games. I brought him the police report from the elementary school. I brought him the forged emergency custody petition. And I brought him the audio recording of you confessing to a criminal conspiracy." Brittany blinked, her manic energy faltering as confusion crept into her tear-stained face. "Grandfather was a deeply paranoid man," I explained, taking a step closer to her. "He anticipated that a large sum of money might attract parasites. He knew you were greedy, Brittany. He just hoped you would eventually outgrow it. So when he drafted the trust, he did not just require a granddaughter named Brittany Junior. He included an ironclad non-negotiable bad actor clause buried in the final pages of the addendum." My father Richard suddenly looked up from his chair. His eyes widened in horror. He knew exactly what a bad actor clause was in high-level corporate trusts. The clause states that if any designated beneficiary attempts to defraud, manipulate, or extort the estate, their claim is instantly invalidated. I continued, making sure my parents could hear every single word. But grandfather went one step further. He explicitly wrote that if a beneficiary commits a felony against a minor in an attempt to accelerate the trust, they are permanently disinherited. By forging a judge's signature and attempting to legally kidnap my 10-year-old daughter to trigger the payout, you activated the clause, Brittany. You disqualified yourself the moment you walked into that school parking lot." Brittany shook her head rapidly, backing away from me. "No," she gasped. "No, that is my money. He loved me best. He loved his legacy, I corrected her coldly. And because you violated the core terms of the trust, the estate bylaws mandate an immediate default. The $15 million bypasses you completely. It automatically transfers to the next direct bloodline descendant of the required generation. I watched the exact moment her brain finally processed the math. The realization hit her like a physical blow. That is right, I whispered, delivering the final devastating truth. The $15 million belongs to Lily now. And because Lily is a minor, the trust defaults to her sole surviving legal guardian. Me. I am the untouchable trustee of the very fortune you committed federal crimes to steal. You did not secure your future Brittany. You just handed me $15 million. Brittany let out a guttural, agonizing scream. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the thick Persian rug, tearing at her gold dress as a complete psychological breakdown overtook her. Jamal did not even look at her. He was staring blankly at the wall, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his defeat. They had sacrificed their family, their freedom, and their humanity for a payout that was never coming. I stood over them, completely untouched by their misery, holding the ultimate victory. The heavy silence inside the VIP room was suddenly broken by a harsh sweeping flash of color. Through the tall, sheer curtains of the country club windows, the night sky was violently illuminated. Red and blue lights strobed across the dark oak-paneled walls, painting my parents' terrified faces in alternating shades of crimson and sapphire. The chaotic roar of the wealthy investors in the grand ballroom outside abruptly shifted. The sounds of angry threats and frantic phone calls morphed into a collective gasp of genuine alarm. I turned my head toward the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the main entrance of the Oakbridge Country Club. A fleet of massive unmarked black SUVs jumped the pristine front curb, completely ignoring the circular valet driveway. Tires screeched against the pavement, leaving thick black skid marks on the manicured concrete. Before the vehicles even came to a complete halt, the heavy doors swung open. Dozens of men and women wearing dark tactical windbreakers with stark yellow lettering printed across their backs poured out into the cool night air. FBI, IRS, Criminal Investigation Division. My father stumbled toward the window, pressing his trembling hands against the thick glass. He watched in absolute disbelief as federal agents stormed the front steps of his exclusive sanctuary. For 40 years, Richard had believed that the massive wooden doors of this club protected him from the consequences of the real world. He believed wealth was a magical shield that made him invisible to the law. That illusion was currently being shattered by the heavy boots of federal law enforcement marching across the marble foyer. Susan let out a high-pitched shriek and backed into the corner of the room, knocking over a silver tray of crystal water glasses. The glass shattered on the floor, but nobody moved to clean it up. Brittany was still on the rug, clutching her ruined gold dress, sobbing hysterically as the strobe lights flashed across her tear-stained face. She looked like a spoiled child who had finally been told no, entirely incapable of processing the nightmare unfolding around her. Jamal remained completely frozen. He did not run. He did not try to hide. The paralysis of total defeat held him firmly in place. He stared blankly at the mahogany doors, waiting for the inevitable. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom burst open with deafening force. The federal agents did not pause to politely ask for directions or check in with the terrified event coordinator. They moved with brutal, practiced efficiency. A tactical team formed a hard perimeter around the exits, ensuring no one could leave the building. The wealthy investors, men and women used to giving orders and demanding respect instinctively, backed away, pressing themselves against the walls to clear a path. Leading the primary entry team was Special Agent Thomas Reynolds. He looked even more intimidating under the crystal chandeliers than he had in the dark parking garage. He strode through the sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos without giving a single billionaire a second glance. His eyes were locked dead ahead, scanning the room until they found the open mahogany doors of our VIP suite. I stood my ground as Agent Reynolds and 6 heavily armed agents marched directly toward me. They crossed the threshold of the VIP room, their tactical gear a stark, violent contrast to the opulent Persian rugs and polished walnut furniture. Agent Reynolds walked straight past my father, ignoring Richard's frantic attempts to introduce himself and demand a phone call to his lawyer. He walked past my mother, who was cowering in the shadows. He walked right past me, offering only a single, barely perceptible nod of professional acknowledgement. The agents moved swiftly, fanning out in a semicircle to completely surround Jamal. The physical space around him vanished instantly. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and no one left to manipulate. The untouchable wealth manager was officially cornered. Jamal Agent Reynolds barked, his voice echoing loudly in the enclosed space. The sheer authority in his tone made Jamal physically flinch. The federal agent reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of folded documents, holding them up to the strobe lights flashing through the window. "I am Special Agent Reynolds with the Federal Bureau of Investigation," he announced, reading from the official paperwork. "We are executing a federal arrest warrant issued by the United States District Court. You are hereby being detained on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Furthermore, agents from the Internal Revenue Service are currently at your primary residence executing a search and seizure warrant for all physical and digital assets." Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His throat worked convulsively. The reality of the federal charges, the specific mention of wire fraud and money laundering, finally broke through his state of shock. He looked down at his trembling hands, the same hands he had used to forge custody documents to steal my daughter. The trap had slammed entirely shut. He was no longer the arrogant king of the financial district. He was just another criminal caught in the act. Two heavily armed agents stepped forward, grabbing Jamal by his shoulders and spinning him around to face the dark oak-paneled wall. He offered absolutely zero physical resistance. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing in the VIP room sounded louder than the string quartet ever did. They pulled his arms forcefully behind his back, the cold metal biting into the cuffs of his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit. The pristine image of the high-powered wealth manager being treated like a common street thug was broadcast clearly through the open mahogany doors. Out in the grand ballroom, the wealthy investors were no longer yelling. They were standing in completely stunned silence. A sea of smartphone screens illuminated the dark room, recording every single second of his public execution. Jamal kept his head bowed, unable to make eye contact with the billionaires whose money he had incinerated. The finality of the handcuffs snapping shut finally broke through Brittany's state of shock. She scrambled up from the Persian rug, her ruined gold dress tangling around her legs. She lunged toward the federal agents, her manicured hands curled into claws. "Get your hands off my husband!" she shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that made the investors in the front row physically wince. "You cannot do this to us. Do you know who we are? Do you know who my father is?" One of the IRS officials easily stepped into her path, holding up a firm hand to block her advance. "Step back, ma'am," the official warned, his tone strictly professional, but carrying a lethal undertone. "Do not interfere with a federal arrest." Brittany spun wildly toward my father. "Daddy, fix this!" she screamed, stomping her foot on the floor like a spoiled toddler throwing a tantrum in a toy store. "Call the governor, call the judge, pay them whatever they want. Tell them to let him go right now." Richard straightened his jacket, desperately trying to salvage whatever tiny fraction of authority he believed he still possessed. He stepped up to Agent Reynolds, puffing out his chest. "Listen here," Agent Richard commanded, using the deep voice that usually made junior executives cower in fear. "I host this charity gala. You are trespassing on private property and you are making a massive mistake. I will have your badge for this public stunt. My lawyers will tear this department apart." Agent Reynolds did not even blink. He looked at Richard with an expression of profound boredom. "We already spoke to your lawyers, sir," the agent replied smoothly. "They resigned. As of 20 minutes ago, they formally withdrew their representation of you and your family, citing your direct involvement in a conspiracy to defraud a federal trust and the use of forged judicial documents." Richard froze, his mouth hanging open. Agent Reynolds pulled a secondary document from his tactical jacket. Furthermore, we traced the registration of the fraudulent Delaware Shell Company directly to a commercial property owned and managed by your primary real estate holding firm. You provided the physical infrastructure for a $12 million money laundering operation. Susan let out another horrifying gasp, clutching Richard's arm as her knees buckled slightly. Agent Reynolds looked directly at my mother. As of this exact moment, the Internal Revenue Service has placed a hard freeze on all of your personal and corporate assets. Your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, and your properties are entirely locked, pending a full federal audit. You are officially under investigation as accomplices to federal wire fraud. If you attempt to transfer a single dime, you will both be joining your son-in-law in federal custody tonight. The words hung in the air heavier than the physical handcuffs on Jamal. Susan looked out into the grand ballroom. The people she had spent 40 years trying to impress, the elite socialites she valued more than her own daughter, were staring back at her with absolute disgust. The whispers began to ripple through the crowd. The family name was instantly transformed from a symbol of high society power to a toxic punchline. They were no longer the kings and queens of the country club. They were radioactive. Jamal was aggressively marched out of the VIP room by the federal agents. As he was paraded through the center of the ballroom, the investors actively stepped back, treating him like he was carrying a highly contagious disease. Brittany followed closely behind him, weeping loudly and uncontrollably, completely stripped of her golden child armor. Richard and Susan remained trapped in the VIP room, surrounded by the shattered ruins of their pristine reputation, staring out at a world that had completely rejected them. I stood perfectly still, watching the empire burn, knowing I was the one who struck the match. 1 year has passed since that night at the Oak Bridge Country Club. The ashes of their empire have long since blown away, scattered by the relentless machinery of the federal justice system. The fallout from the charity gala was swift, brutal, and entirely public. Jamal did not get the luxury of a dramatic, drawn-out trial. The forensic dossier I handed over to the FBI and the SEC was so overwhelmingly comprehensive that his new court-appointed defense attorney advised him to take an immediate plea deal. He is currently serving a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. There are no custom Tom Ford suits in federal prison, and certainly no $50,000 watches to flash at the guards. His days are now measured by a highly regimented schedule, completely stripped of the arrogant power he once wielded so carelessly. The man who threatened to make me homeless is now confined to an 8x10 concrete cell. As for my sister and my parents, their downfall was equally absolute and utterly humiliating. The IRS Criminal Division made good on their promise. Because my father used his commercial real estate holding firm to anchor Jamal's offshore money laundering operations, the federal government seized nearly everything under civil asset forfeiture laws. Their sprawling suburban mansion, the house with the manicured lawn where they tried to rewrite my daughter's identity, was seized and sold at a public government auction to begin paying back the defrauded investors. My parents were completely expelled from their elite social circles. The country club formally revoked their membership, and the wealthy friends they had spent decades trying to impress erased them from their contact lists overnight. Today, Richard, Susan, and Brittany all live together in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the industrial side of the city. Brittany, the former golden child who once believed she was unconditionally entitled to a $15 million trust fund, now works as a front desk receptionist at a discount dental clinic just to help make rent. There is no more talk of elite boarding schools, luxury European vacations, or high society dinners. They are trapped in a prison of their own making, suffocating under the heavy weight of their shattered egos and the mundane reality of the poverty they openly mocked. They have never reached out to me, and I have never once looked back. Meanwhile, my life has completely transformed. When the dust finally settled on the Apex Capital scandal, Mr. Campbell called me into the executive boardroom. He did not hand me a suspension notice this time. Instead, he slid a massive partnership agreement across the table. By exposing the massive fraud before it could officially implicate our mutual clients, I had saved the firm from catastrophic legal liability and public embarrassment. I was immediately promoted to full partner, securing a financial future far brighter than anything I had previously imagined. I no longer work in a small cubicle analyzing spreadsheets. I have a sprawling corner office with a beautiful view of the downtown city skyline. The $15 million trust fund, which legally defaulted to Lily under my grandfather's strict bad actor clause, remains securely locked in a highly conservative financial portfolio. As her sole trustee, I ensure every penny is heavily protected, waiting for her when she is ready to build her own legacy. But we are not waiting for the future to enjoy our lives. Lily and I have spent the last year thriving in absolute peace. We spent the entire summer traveling through Europe eating authentic gelato on the Amalfi Coast and exploring the ancient ruins of Rome. She is a happy, brilliant 11-year-old girl who knows exactly who she is, and she knows that her mother will move mountains to protect her from anyone who tries to cause her harm. I built an impenetrable fortress around my small family of two, using the very professional tools my parents endlessly mocked to secure our absolute freedom. I look back on that terrible Sunday barbecue on the exact moment they handed my daughter that custom embroidered pink silk dress, and I feel nothing but profound gratitude for the chilling clarity it finally gave me. The journey was incredibly painful, forcing me to confront the reality that the people who were supposed to love me conditionally only valued me as a pawn in their twisted games. But stepping out of their shadow allowed me to discover my own true strength. They thought they could erase my daughter's identity for a payout. Instead, I erased their entire legacy. Have you ever used your professional skills to destroy a toxic family member? Let me know in the comments below.